Because I was involved in the original storyline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, things went a lot faster and the events of Iron Man 2 came and went simply because Ivan Vanko was no match for my version of Tony Stark, and Justin Hammer was exposed easily by my technology and he was arrested and he went to prison for life after his following trial, and one of the politicians still hated Tony Stark. Actually, who am I kidding? A lot of people dislike Tony Stark because he's a genius, and most ordinary people misunderstand that kind of vast intelligence because they just can't relate to it no matter how hard they try. And most people have never really met many people with a real photographic memory, but I have, and they literally remember everything. And when I said everything, I mean everything. The people with photographic memories remember it all. It's basically a cheat code in normal human life, because you see, most people can't even remember what did when they were kids, let alone what they ate for lunch last week or whatever they studied in college 10 years ago, which is why I decided to create the NZT pill from the movie Limitless that gives you permanent super intelligence. And then I gave it to Tony Stark and I said, here, try this. And then he asked me, what the hell is this? And then I said, just swallow it and then all will become clear. Tony Stark, trust me, you will understand after that pill. I call it the Limitless pill. Let's just say it increases human potential to the extreme. Tony Stark. And then Tony swallowed the NZT pill and it literally shocked his brain awake and restored all his memories, and now his memory recall is perfect and he doesn't forget anything and he no longer wants drugs. And then Tony Stark said, wow, what the hell is in that pill? And then I said, just think of it as a pill that gives anyone super intelligence permanently. I just kicked your brain into overdrive, Tony Stark, that's all. And then Tony Stark began looking at my first divine metal gauntlet and then he smirked and said, I'll be right back. And then I smiled really big and I said, finally, maybe he won't do any more drugs, I said to myself quietly. And then I took the NZT pill, and then right after I took it I truly understood its powers and I said the famous words, I was blind but now I see. I said it out loud. Well, I wasn't blind, I was already of genius level intelligence, but this pill increased my intelligence permanently to absurd levels, and I even gained telekinetic powers, and I could now even use 100% of my brain like Scarlett Johansson in the movie Lucy. And then I said, now that's interesting. And meanwhile Tony Stark was working on projects like a madman, and he even started laughing like a mad genius villain from those old cartoons and superhero comic books. And then I looked at him with a deadpan expression and I asked him, why are you laughing and what are you laughing at? And then he said, don't be ridiculous, you're a genius too and you understand exactly why I'm laughing, Tony Stark said with a bit of contempt in his voice. And then I said, yes I know, but that's very immature, you're not a little boy, Tony Stark. And then I said, hey, you know what, since I'm this smart I can laugh at whatever I want to. And then Tony Stark continued laughing like a maniac until I released my killing intent, and then he stopped and shuddered in fear. And then I said, you're not the only one that took that Limitless pill. I took it too, and let's just say that now I can use 100% of my entire brain, something you can't do yet, Tony Stark, but I can, and what you just felt was my godlike killing intent, and I can use it to make people freeze in fear of me. And then I said, go right ahead, laugh all you want, I was just joking anyways. And then I laughed like a true villain and I said, I have to go do some things myself. And then I started plans to create the Omnitrix watch from Ben 10, and I even decided to create the flux capacitor from Back from the Future, and I even installed in the same car from the movie Back to the Future. And then I drove it right up to Tony Stark's house and I said, hey Tony Stark, come take a look at this. And then Tony Stark took one look at the iconic DeLorean from the movie Back to the Future and he said, no way you didn't. And then I smiled really big and I said, oh I did. And then Tony Stark said, you son of a bitch, I was thinking about making this myself, I even drew up the plans and the blueprints for everything to make it all perfectly functional. And then I said, well, this one is the one from Back from the Future too, and it can go much faster since it's made of invincible metal and it also has airless invincible tires. And then Tony Stark said, okay, we are definitely driving this now. And then I asked Tony Stark, are you sure you want to do this? And then Tony Stark said, oh hell yes, I definitely want to do this. And then I put the old Back to the Future theme music in the radio and Tony Stark said, oh my god dude, that is so cool.